Hey, 1 week to the election. 1 week it's all over. 1 week it's all over. Um, so take a look at kind of where everything stands. It's
1 week till the fall. That's very many things.
well, depending on who you're rooting for, it could be. um, and here's what we got: national statistics from the University of Florida. No data from Oklahoma or Alabama or New Hampshire, but pretty much almost every state voting now. From their calculations, about 50 million people voted so far. About a third, just over a third of all mail ballots requested have been returned. 23 million, almost 24 million out of 66 million. Almost 27 million in-person early votes, and that's changing by the minute. Very heavy turnouts here on the East Coast.
Is there a live counter?
No, there isn't, because these states are compiling data differently. Sometimes some of them have, you can get this result instantly. Sometimes they'll state release little bits of it throughout the day. Sometimes all once at the end of the day. Sometimes you have to go county by county. In Arkansas, 427,000 people voted so far. Texas, nearly 6 million have voted. California, 4.2 million have voted. Tennessee, 1.7 million. Very heavy turnout in North Carolina, 3.1 million people voted so far. More than 3 million in Georgia. That's about half the number of people turned out in the 2020 election. 5.1 million in Florida. 5 million in Virginia, 1.4 million in Pennsylvania, 1.8 in Ohio, almost 2 million in Michigan. Almost a million in Wisconsin, 1.4 million in Illinois, 1.1 in Massachusetts. New York just got started early voting, more than 1 million people voted there so far. A lot of heavy voting in a lot of areas. Still more than a week to go. It looks like early voting will outpace 2020 early voting. A lot more people voting early this year. A lot of people voted early in 2020, a lot of because of the pandemic, but campaigns are encouraging both sides to everyone to vote early. The convenience of it, and because it's easier to track people who haven't voted yet. And a lot of people just kind of excited and some just want to get it over with. Very, very heavy turnout in a lot of states.
Also, politics has been sensitive, like now, especially now, a threat to democracy if the other side wins. So they're having the democracy will collapse if you vote for this person. So gotta get on now.
Yeah, a lot of campaigns are prone to extremes. You run for office, every good deed becomes a sin, and every sin becomes an atrocity. But I got to remember what the campaigns are doing right now. One, they're trying to get your attention. Two, trying to convince you to vote for their side, either by making the other side look so bad, or by trying to emphasize what they're doing. Yes, every misstep by campaign, or by campaign spokesman, or by candidate of that party is emphasized. For example, Donald Trump had a rally in New York City recently. Not a state he's going to win. But there was a guy giving remarks before he spoke, called Puerto Rico a garbage can in the middle of the ocean. There are a lot of Puerto Rican voters in Pennsylvania, North Carolina, Georgia, Florida, Pennsylvania. They are very mad right now. And do you blame them? No. Abortion rights are on the ballot in a lot of states. You have a lot of women voting early in these states. Nationally, women are outvoting men by about 10 points. It's like about 51-40, 51-49 women to men. But this year is like, so far, it's 55-45. Now, in the past couple of elections, Democrats voted very heavily early in the election, so that tended to give Democrats kind of a built-in advantage going into Election Day. But that meant because most Democrats are voting before the election, Election Day had a lot of Republicans voting, so it kind of washed out a little bit. But a lot of the Republicans who normally would vote on Election Day, they're voting early, so that washout effect may not be as much this time. It's averaging out a little bit more. Democrats may not have quite as wide a lead in early voting, but won't get as much outvoted on Election Day. But it looks like most people in this election, most election ballots will be cast before Election Day. So that is kind of a turnaround here from previous years. A lot of countries, they'll do voting on 1, 2, or 3 days, but here we'll have voting like 2 or 3 weeks. Which brings us all to public opinion. Everybody's got an opinion. We've touched on this a little bit before. As a combination of views, attitudes, and ideas held by individuals and community. And polls, it's a cross-section of opinion at a given moment. What you've got to understand, though, about polling, though, is it's not anecdote. It's not, I saw all these people voting for this guy, or I saw all these people voting for that other guy. That's not a representative sample. That's just, I happen to see something at random. And at random moments, you know how math works, sometimes you're going to have this huge outlier from the average, or just the opposite of what actually the way things are. So counting signs, that doesn't work.
Maybe more than one person in the house.
Yeah, it might be one person vote in the household. It could be a vacant house. It could be the landlord said, "You're putting this sign in that yard I own."
Or maybe
Exactly. Yeah.
tenants.
And so they got a saying on the east side here. Just because I got my your sign in my yard doesn't mean I'm voting for you. Got people who have multiple signs in their yard. They have multiple properties, multiple lots they own. Now, most states, they do regulate where you can put signs. For example, in the middle of a highway or about to exit the median of a highway, you can't put them there. You can't put them on public property. For example, they can't just dump a bunch of signs at the high school or the college here and say, no, that's illegal. Churches can't put political signs in their yards either. Why? Because they're nonprofit organizations. They endorse a political candidate, they lose their nonprofit status.
Yeah.
So they can, but somebody could, guy voting for the other person could call the IRS and say, "Look what we got here." But yeah, religion and politics are already touchy enough subjects. You don't want to mix the two. Yeah. So I've seen a lot of people walk out of churches over one person or another saying one group or another people in that church saying who they're voting for, saying you're going to go to hell for voting for this person. Yeah, I agree. It's not what Christianity is about, but some people do it anyway. That's not an anecdote. So counting signs, that's not going to help you. It may indicate, yeah, there's a little bit stirring underneath the under the surface, but it doesn't necessarily mean there's a whole wide scale change in voting patterns or voter turnout. Signs don't vote. So who does use all these polls here? We'll go here to on pollster ratings, ABC. Remember, who uses these polls? It's the media, use them for the news. Politicians use them for campaigns. Um, and candidates use these issues that are important, or the issues that are important. What's gauging well among voters. Next, say in high-level campaigns, where they do often employ their own pollsters. Congressional campaigns usually do. Statewide campaigns in states usually employ their own pollster. Senatorial and congressional campaigns and presidential campaigns. Say corporations do as well. Now, corporations do this, figure out kind of what consumers want, what ads play best, and so forth. But political polling is very volatile. Because not a lot of people want to sit down and answer the phone anymore. That's been a big problem this year. Now, the American Association of Political Opinion Research, there is actually an organization for political pollsters. It has a code of professional ethics and practices for polling. And ABC News tries to follow that. Pollsters will not falsify or fabricate data. Are there pollsters to do that? Yeah. You can pay anybody to put any set of numbers out. It doesn't necessarily mean they're going to be accurate. Pollsters not engage in betting markets. They may be directly may be impacted by their survey work. Because you got to remember, betting markets, that's the thing you hear about every so often, they don't mean a thing in terms of voting. They don't mean a thing. It's just a guess. Betting markets are accurate. The Dodgers will be up 3 games on the Yankees World Series right now. Pollsters not knowingly select research tools or methods of analysis that yield misleading conclusions. Do a lot of them do that? Yeah, they do. Pollsters disclose to the public the methods and procedures used to obtain publicly disseminated research results. If such disclosure are insufficient, pollsters will respond to queries when seeking further detail. There is a lot of polling firms. They'll simply send out what they call their top line numbers, basically the summary. You say candidate A, candidate B, 55% to 45%. That's all they'll release. They don't send any more information. And that immediately is suspect, especially if they just put it on their website. They don't have any kind of link to what they call their data. They call their crosstabs. There are a lot of polling firms and polling aggregate firms that say they don't. If this firm will not give out their public information, their crosstabs or hide it behind a paywall, don't send it out to the public. They will not use them. Pollsters not knowingly make interpretations of research results that are inconsistent with the data available. or sanction such interpretations made by others. Because they won't mislead the data. They'll simply say what the facts are. They can compare polls. They can show what's happening in some of the demographic groups. But they have to be honest about it. Pollsters not represent the purpose of their surveys or conduct other activities such as sales, fundraising, or true what's called push polling for political campaigns, and the guys conducting research. And saying a lot of campaigns have used that in the past. Push polling. Basically, would you vote for this candidate if you knew that he did A? This candidate is accused of doing this. Do you still vote for him now? This is after you've already asked the question who you voted for. That's called push polling. Except polls that are conducted and released on behalf of political clients, such as candidates, political action committees, lobbying organizations, and such clients, will clearly be labeled as such. Pollsters will make no false or misleading claims as to a poll's sponsorship or purpose. That is, you're an honest pollster, you can say who owns you. If you're working for a campaign, you say you're working for a campaign. And if a campaign gets good results out, you better believe they're going to release that information. If it's not so good, they don't see much point in releasing it. Why scare people off? But lobbyists, they do use political polls as well because they need that data how to best, one, identify where support for their cause is strongest, in which congressional districts, they know which senator and congressman to talk to, and two, how to best approach lawmakers on how to affect public policy. See, lobbying, that's an important part of the process. You need to talk to politicians, let them know what you're thinking, and sometimes you need professionals who know all these people to go in and do that for you. But it can get messy because sometimes these are hired guns for people who will mislead lawmakers and who will try to convince them to vote for bills for nefarious purposes. Pollsters will correct any errors in their work that come to their attention that could influence interpretation of the results. And sometimes, there's a math error in there. That happens. Factual misrepresentation or distortion have been made publicly. Pollsters will correct them in a public forum that is similar to possible the original dissemination. So that's the data that 538 tries to use through ABC News. But you've got partisan polls. Polls are considered partisan if they're conducted on behalf of any organization that conducts a large majority of its political activity on behalf of one political party or candidate. There are a lot of firms that will just work just for Democrats or just for Republicans. Is that illegal? No. Does it cut off a lot of potential business? Maybe. But it's a decision you got to make sometimes. Sometimes they just prefer one side or the other so much they just rather do business with this one side. For example, the Democratic Congressional Campaign Committee has an in-house polling operation that is always considered partisan. Polls sponsored by partisan organizations are noted on the polls page by a solid diamond next to the sponsor's name. That's what this And if they find an organization is selectively releasing polls favorable to a certain candidate, they can also categorize that as partisan. ABC says, well, we go out our way to not characterize news organizations as partisan, even they have a liberal and conservative view, but selectively releasing data that favors one party is a partisan action, and those polls will be treated as such. In other words, you can't say you're neutral and you only release data that is beneficial towards one party and negative against another. freedom of press says you can release whatever information you want, say whatever you want about these or about the different parties, but if you're going to be neutral, you really do have to be neutral. And just selectively release data. Or can't just take information, slant it in such a way as it basically completely skews what's really being said. You know, the dangers of both sidism. You gotta remember, these polls, they're include opinions about issues, include opinions about ideas. Um, it's not just a candidate preference and information. For example, just by looking at your browser history, a lot of times ads will seem to follow you. Like you click on one thing and all of a sudden you get 50 ads about that one thing based on mathematical algorithms. It's based on years of polling research that show that if you're interested in this one thing, odds are you may want to learn a little bit more about it or may lean towards one idea or another. There's one thing you've got to understand about politics here is a lot of that campaigning, it's about psychology. Not just getting into the voters' minds, trying to scare them one way or another, get them angry one way or another, but also trying to get into the other candidate's mind. Try to make them think they're doing worse than they are, or they're about to have a complete disaster or something, or they're making a mistake. And they try to get into your mind. They play mind games with each other. That's why sometimes they have these very limited ads that just target just very specific areas because they know certain people are going to see these ads and that's going to bother them. Mind games. And for example, that's why sometimes candidates will say use one particular phrase or use one particular thing. It may not be a phrase or issue that resonates with anybody, but it may just get just under the skin of that other guy just enough that he just goes off the rails about it. What you got to understand about public opinion is it's dynamic. It fluctuates, changes in time. People may not feel very strongly about one issue, so they kind of go back and forth on it a little bit. What you're interested in, a lot of people may not be interested in. Not interested very much. You're in a political science course, you're studying politics in the middle of an election year. You may have some interest in an election, but doesn't mean everybody else is. Out there in the real world right now, what is everybody else doing? They're working, they're taking kids back and forth to school, they're worried about the health of themselves or family, planning trips. Right now, they're thinking about Halloween and trick-or-treating, and don't have a lot of time to think about much of anything else. They might be starting to think about Christmas or Thanksgiving. Those signs on the side of the road, a lot of people really don't even notice those. A lot of candidates go to particular neighborhoods trying to get support. They may put a piece of paper on your door or mail you something. The leaflet drop, that's not actually that doesn't actually get a lot of people's attention. A lot of people see it, may half glance at it, wad up, throw it in the trash. Junk mail you get home, what do? Trash. May not even really think about it. What do most people do when they see a TV show goes to commercial? Pause or change the channel or go to the bathroom. Not really pay a lot of attention to it. If I'm watching TV or something, one of my kids comes up and asks me something, what the first thing I do? Pause or mute it. Now, some opinions people hold very intensely, certain ideas, certain candidates. Others more casual preferences. You've got to remember, it's because people are different; they have different priorities. They have the very famous Gallup poll here from 1948. Gallup was really famous about being a leading polling firm, but they really kind of pioneered polling in the 1930s. They started by going door to door. But then they started going to telephones. More people had telephones. I'll give you another famous example here. Because polls aren't always right. Because some see some very close races and just take a guess. Some just depends on who they reach. Anyway, I'll give you an example. Leading candidates were um, Thomas Dewey and Harry S. Truman. And June, oh, here we go. Back up. Now, March of 48, Gallup poll shows Dewey with a 8-point lead, 47-39. Um, there's a left-leaning candidate, former Vice President Henry Wallace, pulling at 6 or 7%. You got to understand about third-party candidates because they don't have the organization, can't quite keep the intensity don't know how to identify their voters. Their support drops from the final poll to the final election results, almost invariably. Are there exceptions? Yes, but not always. As you see kind of having here. Wallace's support drops as the election goes on. But throughout most of the campaign, Truman's polling here in the mid to upper 30s, 38, 37, 36, on into August. Dewey pulling in upper 40s, 47, 48, 40, 49. Now, you start noticing here is by September, it's starting to tighten just a little bit. Back to 47-39 by middle of September. 46-40 by the end of September. But Dewey had been ahead so far, and everyone kept saying, oh, they hated Truman, he was unpopular. Everyone's saying there's no way he's going to win. So a lot of people, especially the Gallup organization, again thinking, well, okay, it's going to be Dewey. We expect it's going to be Dewey's going to win. But again, notice the trends here. Finally, the last poll he took is in middle October, 50-45. Ends up happening. Truman ends up winning a margin of 49 to 46. And here's what happened. Partially margin of error, but also how they're polling. What was most of Gallup's polling in 1948? By telephone. Now, what's the problem with that in 1948? Not as advanced, and not a lot of people had telephones. A lot of people had what they call a party line. That is, you have 4 people sharing one number. I mean, you can pick up the phone and listen in to somebody else's conversation. It's cheap, but it's a phone service, and somebody could get you in an emergency. You can call out locally, get someone. You could, but again, not everyone had phones. Millions of Americans didn't have phones. And then, when are you calling? Probably during the day, probably the early evening. Is that picking up all those people who are working? Is that picking up some farmer working out in the fields? Is that picking up the guys working at the factory? Probably not. In fact, it didn't. They're missing a lot of Truman's core constituencies. So, the final analysis, it was Truman was closing the gap, but the poll wasn't really picking that up. It was imperceptible. They could see there was a little bit of motion, not much, but it was there. Dewey just came off as arrogant. People just didn't like the guy very much. Sometimes, yeah, likability, that does matter. Do people like you? They're like a decent guy. Maybe Dewey was a good prosecutor. Doesn't mean he's likable. And do you want a prosecuting attorney to be lovable? No, you want somebody to go out and get the gangsters, which is what Dewey did. But is that necessarily somebody you want as president? Not necessarily. So, Truman ended up winning it because it kept missing a lot of their voters. That's an issue that have a lot to do with today's election, too, is response rates. All the pollsters are saying there's been a horrible problem with response rates. They're dialing up people, are trying to get random samples of panels from the internet, and just aren't getting a lot of people to respond. They may get the people who are very strongly interested, but not a lot. There's not a lot of people who are just kind of on the fence. It's just kind of hard to gauge them. The younger voters have been very hard to contact because how many of you actually answer phone numbers you don't know? Very, very few. Especially if it happens to be marked spam or something. Sometimes they're flagged for that, but most pollsters aren't flagged as that. But
One thing about spam, though.
yeah. Is that phone you carry around your pocket, designed as a telephone, that's actually the least thing you use it for usually. It's not necessarily you're going to somebody picks up the phone. You're not necessarily or interrupts a phone call you are having. It's not necessarily something you're going to pick up immediately. Like I say, these pollsters don't call and leave messages. Could you call us back? We need you for an opinion poll. They don't do that. So the youth vote has been very hard to gauge this year. Because they're very hard to contact. They've had some wild swings. Some saying Trump with a narrow lead on him. Others saying Harris with a huge lead on him. Most polls are zeroing in on Harris leading among younger voters, at least nationwide. And if you have a small subset of a poll, small demographic group, then yeah, it's hard to get an accurate poll sometimes because you have just 3 or 4 respondents give you a weird answer. That can kind of throw off the poll sometimes if it's a small sample because they weight these polls too. And that's been another problem they've been seeing is these pollsters, because they're having problems with response rates, they're trying to compensate for that mathematically, demographically. They're trying to model the election on what they think the election's going to look like this year, who they think is going to turn out. And most are assuming a turnout similar to 2020. Yeah.
So they're going to do an edge. Already didn't think are saying that, and like we got to do this as well.
Yeah, exactly. It's not they're trying to avoid making a mistake, but are they overcompensating and missing something else that's happening? That's possible. They're saying these polls could end up swinging wildly one way or another from the final result. So mail-in internet polls or coupon polls are unreliable. Remember, what they are relying on though is honesty. They're trying to get you to. They're hoping you're being honest about who you are and who you're voting for. You may hear a lot of terms like some called blue wave or red mirage. That yes, there are a lot of partisan pollsters who try to fudge the data a little bit, try to make it look like one party's leading more than what it is. That happened a lot at the end of the 2022 election. A lot of Republican pollsters are saying it's going to be a wipeout. It's going to be a wipeout. Republicans are going to win in a massive landslide. And they all kept saying it's going to be a landslide for the Republicans. What happens on Election Day? Democrats gain in the Senate. Republicans barely take the House. This red wave they're saying didn't happen. So some people called it the red mirage. And can the opposite happen? Yeah, absolutely. And most pollsters, since their business relies on them being accurate, they try to avoid this. And it's why some pollsters, like say CNN, they said last weekend they gave out their poll, said this is our last poll of the campaign, and they showed a tie. So what's the story they're going to say on election night? Well, a bunch of voters broke suddenly at the end toward one candidate or another, skewing the results. They're hedging their bets. Nationally, most polls saying nationally, still saying about the same thing happened. Harris about 2, 3, 4 points. ABC had a poll out saying 51-47 Harris. Is that what's going to happen in the end? Don't know. You tell me. Could it be just the opposite? Yeah, that's possible. Tell me. Because you're studying a fluid electorate. These eddies and currents and public opinion, all these little things kind of floating out of solution, these random little data points popping up all of a sudden, and that can skew results. It's like trying to measure the Missouri River up in Montana versus Missouri. Got a tiny little trickle up in the mountains at one end, and this huge, raging, flat, calm river flowing into the Mississippi at the other end. And all sorts of things that going into that water and coming out of it at different points. Because the wildlife and fish at one end of the Missouri River, that's very different what it find at the other end. Won't find hardly any industrial pollutants coming out in the mountains from the snow melt for the Missouri rivers, but come in through Kansas City and St. Louis area, oh, a lot. It depends on what you're looking at and what point where you're starting from. And that's public polling. It's changing, it's shifting. They're getting a picture of something. They know it's close, it's being hotly contested. That is a given. They're predicting, though, is a turnout similar to 2020. The problem with that is a lot of people died in that pandemic. Is that going to be enough to skew results? I don't know. A lot of people turned 18 since then. A lot of people immigrants have become citizens since then. A lot of issues that come between 2020 and 2024. Supreme Court rulings, candidates, and so forth. So that public opinion is changing. So sometimes you get this weird result here, and you don't know what to make of it until after it's all over. That's another thing. We can study these results 80 years later. We can say, oh, we can see what's happening. In 1948, they couldn't. So there's a little bit of a shift towards Truman, but it doesn't look like enough. He's still way behind. Got to remember, a lot of things happening here. How strong is the support for a candidate? Is it fluid? Are these candidates breaking one way or another? That's another thing. A lot of these polls you'll see not adding up to 100%. That's not unusual. There's nothing wrong with that. There are a lot of people who are undecided. A lot of people saying right now that voting for a third-party candidate, have no intention of doing so, just as a placeholder. So I kind of like this guy, but I don't know. So it's hard to figure out. How's a candidate going one way or another? And you have these undecided voters. Some of them won't vote because they hate both of them, the famed double hater, or they just aren't that interested in it, or they're sitting there Tuesday night at the election. I said, "Oh, that was today. I forgot." In spite of the $1 billion each campaign is spent, and the billions more spent by the parties and all the political action committees, yes, that's possible. Somebody missed it. Or it's just so far off their radar screen they just weren't paying attention. That does happen. So there aren't a lot of political ads in my kids' Pokemon cartoons.
Would it really be effective?
Was that?
Would it really be effective?
Yeah, it would be. Yeah, exactly, because the ads are aimed for a different demographic. Those kids, people watching Pokemon, aren't voting. But one day they will, but not now.
It could, they showed them, oh, Daddy, that's what I saw in my video.
Yeah. Exactly. It's just and independent voters, people who are not aligned with one voter, they want to register with one party or another. Some states you don't have to. Some states you literally just have to put right in independent or unaffiliated. Some they may try to go one way or another, and a lot of people don't. So the independent voter, a lot of people like to say they're not tied down to one party or another. Are they always entirely independent? No. They actually tend to lean towards one party or another. Like I said, our example of the election last, looking at balance, they don't always go Democrat, Republican, Democrat, Republican, Democrat, Republican, Democrat, Republican, 50-50 down the middle. They don't do that. Very rarely do they. You find, yeah, sometimes you find something. Almost never do you find that. Typical independent, they may see these races vote, and 80% of them vote Republican or 80% vote Democratic. Or vote just for the top president, Congress, governor, and that's it. People are kind of funny about their opinions, so it's kind of hard to predict exactly what people will do in certain situations. And they may be telling you they're going to do one thing, that doesn't necessarily mean what they are going to do. So that's always the problem with polls, is they're assuming you're being honest. And at that moment, you probably are being honest. But somebody at the last minute can say, there's no way I can vote for this person. No, I'm for someone else. Or they don't want to start, somebody picks up the phone, having family dinner or the conversation with family and friends, and they're taking a political poll, and they may give you another answer just to avoid giving you a fight, or say, let me go to the other room. Don't tell anybody I'm voting for this person. That does happen. So in the end, what happens? We don't know. Even exit polls they take after the election, there are news organizations, they take polls of people at certain key precincts, figure out how they're voting, and even those have a margin of error. And yes, pollsters sometimes make mistakes sometimes. There's a recent poll of Pennsylvania that one pollster released as a partisan pollster. And what did they do? They forgot to include Philadelphia in the results. The biggest county in the state, most heavily Democratic county in the state, and they left out Philadelphia County. So yeah, that's a mistake. So it's not sort of a poll immediately you're going to throw out. So right now, these polls are really just kind of in flux. A lot of pollsters, because these polls are expensive to conduct, they're just going to sit back and say, you know what, we're just going to wait and see what happens. So what do? They quit polling. And right now, the campaign is looking at who's voting. Like I said at the beginning, women are voting very heavily so far. Who they're voting for, all they can do is go by voter registration. Right now, in early voting in Pennsylvania, if you're going by voter registration, 400,000 more Democrats have voted than Republicans. But you also have a large chunk of independent, unaffiliated, and third-party voters. Now, is it just 400,000 straight up for the Democrats? Don't know. Are all those Democrats voting for Harris? We're assuming they are, but they may not be. Are all those Republicans voting for Trump? Maybe. We're assuming they are. We don't know. How are those independents breaking? Are they going toward Harris or toward Trump? Don't know. The poll's trying to give us an answer, but again, response rate and random samples, it's not getting it. Now the polls, remember, they're calibrated, they're weighted towards voters being fairly even, men and women, but that's not being the case. That's not the case this year so far. Now, could that even up on voting day, on election day? Maybe. I don't know what's going to happen a week from now. So let's take a look here at pollster ratings. It's 5:30. Who they consider generally be the best pollster in the country. But again, these ratings here, they're based on what they did in 2020 and 2022. Is that necessarily how they're going to be good this year? They could be completely wrong. Because remember, Gallup, 1948, they're the best pollster in the country. They completely missed Truman. Of course, there's also a saying in politics, if you're invoking Harry Truman, you're probably losing. But no one's invoking Truman. Both campaigns have sets of polls they're pretty happy with. And that's their pushing of promoting. They're going all over the country trying to get those last little votes out. Best pollster in the country, though, New York Times. They contract with Siena College. ABC News, The Washington Post. That's sort of the next best one. Poll score. Error bias we can attribute to the pollster. Negative numbers are better. Stands for predictive optimization of latent skill and level in surveys, considering overall record empirically. Transparency. Grade how transparent a pollster is. And number of polls analyzed. They take a lot of these polls. YouGov, that's an online firm, so they take a lot of polls. They had like 596 polls. Marquette University Law School, they're be pretty transparent with their numbers. YouGov, pretty transparent with their numbers. Generally rated fairly well. Does that mean they're going to be accurate? Siena College been leaning kind of Republican this year. Does that mean they're right or they're wrong? I don't know. Monmouth University, Marist College, Suffolk University, Data Orbital, UMass Lowell, Emerson College. Because got to remember, a lot of these polls are being done by universities. Why? Because they're expensive, and with students, got cheap labor. You want to get an A in this class? You conduct these polls, and we can follow our numbers. Seltzer and Company, that's a pretty good pollster. CNN. Survey USA, generally considered one of the most accurate in the country, but 538, they're not too impressed with them. Have them ranked number 15. Quinnipiac University. All anybody really knows about Quinnipiac is the University of New Jersey, but only people who ever heard of it are people who read polls. Ipsos, Christopher Newport University, so forth. And of course, there are hundreds of pollsters here. Here are some of the really bad ones. Laughlin and Associates, half a star. Transparency score of 1 out of 47 polls analyzed. Some of these they just don't have a rating for because they haven't done very many polls. Folger isn't rated very highly. It's a 279. It is a partisan pollster. They work for Republicans. Some of these may hear of once, and that's it. Hendrix College, an Arkansas college, it's not rated too well. It's a pretty campus, but and basically all they poll is Arkansas. Polls are usually off by a few points. Some of these people come along, you'll never hear from them again. As we go back up here, Mason-Dixon, generally kind of conservative leaning polls, so they do a lot of polling here in the South. Like that, they're kind of destined too. But you go here to back up here to YouGov. It's an online firm. They mostly do polling in England. They're pretty accurate in England, but they know how the English electorate works. They don't necessarily understand the American electorate. That's the thing with the foreign poll companies is they kind of miss some of the nuances of a country. That was another one called Redfield and Wilton. They did a lot of really good polling in England, but in the United States, they miss all the time. But with the outlier polls, these ones that are kind of way out in left field, or outfield, depending on your point of view, usually have what they call a reversion to the mean. One polling point may be out of place, but eventually kind of comes back towards the middle. And so a lot of these polls are kind of saying very similar things. When people weight polls, it's usually by demographic, region, age, and so forth, income, party affiliation. Plus affiliation in these polls by likely voter versus registered voter. Now, the likely voter, that's who that poll thinks is most likely to vote. That's usually based on two things. What they see as voter enthusiasm and voting history. But again, they're relying on you to tell them that to figure that out. And sometimes they'll weight that differently for different parties. Sometimes they will weight voter enthusiasm in different ways. Voting history. They may weigh you down because you only vote in presidential election years. And a lot of people do that. There are millions of people who vote in a presidential election who will not vote in any other election because it's the most prominent one. But there are people who vote in party primaries who sometimes don't vote in the general election. Because who they're voting and why, they have different reasons for that. And again, this weighting of polls is based not just on the demographics of the area, but who they expect is going to turn out. And that can completely skew everything. Go back here at 538 again. Something called the House effect. There are some polls that have a natural lean towards one party or another. Like I say here, they don't necessarily want to make unnecessarily large adjustments to pollsters' House effect. House effects now are calculated using the value of the polling average on each day of the time series rather than the average over the entire time period. Bayesian statistics, that's it's kind of a mathematical formula they use. What do I mean by that? Conjugate Bayesian analysis of the Gaussian distribution by Kevin Murphy. And that's the formula they use for likelihood. A lot of calculus, high summations. Except Professor Morgan to explain this to you. They calculate uncertainty for every average. Yes, there is an uncertainty. They call that a margin of error. And that's usually about 3, 4, 5 points. It's a certain sample size, but the sample size that cuts both ways. Sometimes it's too big. It actually is too big. Sometimes it's too small. It's too big, it's too much noise in it. Easy to get lost in all those numbers. Too small, you're not getting enough sample of the population. There's kind of a Goldilocks zone where it's just right. Usually like around 1,000 voters in a state or something. But you got to make sure you kind of sample everybody, sample the different regions of the state. Yeah. You could, yeah. But and they'll calculate that using these mathematical formulas. 3 to 5%, or 3 or 4% margin of error. That's pretty standard. but that means it can go 3 or 4 points either direction. It's like a 6 or 7 point margin of error. It's not a very good poll. Sometimes they can miscalculate. That's how they calculate their averages, what version they use. Because sometimes polls will ask the same question in different ways. Kind of average it out from there. Does the matchup reflect something that happened in reality? For horse race polls, we exclude polls that ask people how they'd vote in hypothetical matchups. But, for example, suppose this person running against Harris. How would you vote? Okay, it's an interesting question, but it's not reflecting reality. Say, suppose you'd elect for Harris against J.D. Vance. It's not going to happen. Not in this election. Could happen in 28, I don't know. But they're not going to include that. So, we'll satisfy our poll policy. Again, the standards, ethical standards. It says tracking poll. Because sometimes you'll have this poll, let's say there are 900 likely voters. And by tracking poll is, they'll take this poll over 3 days. 300 on day 1, 300 day 2, 300 day 3. They average those together. And to keep it tracking, they'll get rid of the 300 they tracked on day 1 and ask another 300 on day 4 and average days 2, 3, and 4. The same thing for the next day. Drop day 2 and just average 3, 4, and 5 together. So the potential overlap is called tracking polls. They run it through their database, dynamically remove polls that have field dates that overlap with each other until none are overlapping. We have retained the greatest number of polls possible for that series and firm, paying special attention to include the most recent poll. Back to sample size being too big. When polls are fed into the model, we decrease the effective sample size of large surveys. Leaving these large numbers as they are would give these polls too much weight in our average. So we cap sample sizes at 10,000. Then for polls conducted for a given context, we use a method called Windsorizing to limit extreme values. Windsorizing here. And basically, try to take out the outlier polls. Try to get you an average. But again, still, it's very tricky because what happens if the outlier starts becoming more the mainstream of it? And sometimes, yes, they're partisan pollsters. They will try to flood the zone, create a mirage one way or another that may make an outlier poll seem more reasonable. And that's a problem in polling. It happens when pollsters and a group of pollsters start putting their thumbs on the scale. That's trying to create a turnout model that in reality may not exist. That can skew the poll several points one way or another. Sample. So the statistical formula for a poll's margin of error, number of pollsters usually reach, that tells us how much of the poll can be off due to random sampling error alone. That uses a square root function, so their weighting does too. Multiple polls in a short window. We want to avoid a situation where a single pollster floods a race with data, overwhelming the signal from that of the pollsters. So just try to pay attention just to one piece of data one pollster's saying, not what everybody's saying. But if you pull all these together, so far it's looking like Harris by a few points. But again, is that going to be the final error? We don't know. Because public opinion polling has changed so much because our culture has changed so much. Cultures change because People are not static, they're not locked in place. What we do, how we do things, that changes throughout our lives. Our priorities change. Our political opinions and priorities may not change, or may not change very much, but how we do things, that does change. Example, very few people still have landline phones. Usually people who are older have those because they've had that same phone number for the last 40 or 50 years. Why change now? Businesses have landline phones because they're going to stay right there. They don't see they need that. They've always had that phone number. They don't see any reason to change it. Because your employees are always coming in and out, you need one constant phone number. So people do things differently, change things over time. K-nearest neighbors algorithm. That's how they calculate out with outliers. What's its distance to the next nearest survey? You can take out the extreme outliers. They can try to average it down. Sometimes you do get weird samples. Okay. And again, some polls are just so bad you just can't use them. Population adjustments and so forth. Anyway, that's how ABC News does it. So there's how the polls actually kind of look now. Don't know. Nebraska, Trump by 15 points. That seems fairly normal. But Siena College, Texas by 10 points. We've had some polls showing as close as 3. So a poll may actually be good in one area, but they poll somewhere else, in a different state, their poll could be completely wrong. So these could be right, these could both be wrong, one could be right, one could be wrong. Don't know. And a lot of them here in the margin of error, these ones outlined here in white. Especially here towards the end, seeing a lot of polls from people you may never heard of. Fort Hays State University, 5-point race in Kansas, that seems very unusual. If that'd be the case, I don't know. And you're polling here in these very tight races, still very tight. Okay. So 1 week to go, make sure you do vote, drag your friends and family to do it, and keep up our readings. We'll keep looking at all this as we go.
We're required to vote, right?
Are you required for this class? I can't make that an assignment, but your civic duty says, yes, vote. But I'm not making you vote.
I thought that was part of the class.
Political science, you should be interested and should vote, but I'm not going to make you vote. It doesn't matter if you're